Andrew is the model for all Christians who labor quietly where God has called them. We may not know their names. We may not applaud their efforts, but they are unsung heroes. Now let me tell you about a couple of more contemporary unsung heroes. How many of you have heard of Edward Kimball? Raise your hand. Edward Kimball. Yeah, you probably. How about Mordecai Ham? You heard of Mordecai Ham? Well, let me tell you who these guys were. Edward Kimball was a Sunday school teacher, and he worked in a shoe store. And he had a coworker named Dwight, and he wanted to share the gospel with. He was very reluctant to do so. Finally, he mustered up the courage, went to Dwight, shared with him about Jesus Christ, and Dwight, much to Edward's delight, accepted Christ right there on the spot. Oh, by the way, Dwight ended up becoming the great evangelist, D.L. Moody. And you might say that D.L. Moody went from selling souls to saving them. And he went on to change his world. But we applaud the Moodys of the world, but we don't recognize the Edward Kimballs, the guy that led Moody to Christ. Well, the story doesn't end there. It continues on. And Moody went on to preach around the world. And while he was preaching on one occasion, a pastor named Frederick D. Meyer was deeply stirred. And as a result, he himself went into a nationwide preaching ministry. And while he was preaching on one occasion, a man named Wilbur Chapman, who was a college student, accepted Christ. And Chapman went on to be an evangelist, and he employed a young baseball player to help him. And that baseball player's name was Billy Sunday. Well, Billy Sunday went on to become the premier evangelist of his day. And on one occasion, Sunday was asked to preach in Charlotte, North Carolina, which he did, and it was very well received, and so they asked him to come back. Sunday had a conflict in his schedule, so they instead brought in a relatively unknown evangelist known as Mordecai Ham. He set up his tent. They laid the sawdust down on the floor like they did in those days, and on one of the final nights of the crusade, a lanky farm boy made his way up the aisle. Everyone knew him simply as Billy Frank. We know him today as Billy Graham. So put it all together. Kimball reached Moody, who touched Meyer, who reached Chapman, who helped Sunday, who reached businessmen in Charlotte, causing them to invite Mordecai Ham, who ultimately reached Billy Graham. So here's what we can learn from something like this. It's not over until it's over. Now maybe God won't use you to bring a lot of people into the kingdom. Maybe you will only ultimately in your life reach, say, 10 people, while others reach many more, and you'll feel that you are somewhat of a failure in your efforts at evangelism. But the story isn't over yet, is it? Because let's just take one of these 10 people. What if he was the next Billy Graham? What if she was the next Corrie ten Boom? I mean, you never know. Or maybe the person that one of your converts would reach, or the person that the convert of the convert would reach. Maybe 100 years from now, someone that will change the world will start their ministry that can be traced back to your faithful efforts in approaching that one person. It just shows you that every effort really matters.